think we can go ahead and get started. And for those who don't know me, my name is Kim Humphrey, and I'm the CEO of Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. And we so appreciate you joining us tonight for this Recovery in Action series that we've created. And we're also very thankful that we have Dr. Brian Licuanan again with us tonight. He was with us just a while back. For those who don't know him, I'll let him introduce himself a little bit, but I just want to share that I got to know him a year or so ago through another individual and have gotten to uh, work with him on a couple of things now. Read his book that he put out, which is How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment, which had several conversations with you about how the book really resonated with me, with the PAL principles that we really push out there through our meetings, and just really appreciated the work that you have done on this. And so, again, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Last time we talked about a number of things in your book about some must knows. Tonight we're going to be talking about some phases of recovery. But before we jump into that, maybe I could just let you say a couple of things and then we'll get going. So again, thank you for joining us, and all of you out there, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. And at the end of about 45 minutes or so of this talk, we'll have an opportunity to answer some questions, and hopefully we'll share some things that will be helpful and useful to you. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Laquan, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim, for organizing this webinar for today. And thank you for those of you who are returning. Welcome back. I really appreciate you coming back and joining. And those of you that are new as well, thank you so much. This opportunity to reach out, and I didn't realize the diversity of people across the United States that are tuning in. And so someone said that it's close to their bedtime in Florida. So I really wanted to thank you for allowing me to hopefully not put you to sleep, but help facilitate your sleep and put you a little bit of ease of mind. So let me introduce myself, as Kim had mentioned, just so you have a little bit of an idea of what I do and sort of how I envision today. This is my third group webinar with PALS, and hopefully not the last. And so there's sort of a building block taking place in terms of the topics that we discussed. But let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a licensed psychologist. I have my PhD. I'm from Southern California, Orange County area. This is where I reside and practice. Um, got my graduate degree. I have two masters, and I have a PhD that I got from the University of Oklahoma. Did quite a lot of work and varied work. I worked at a residential treatment facility for adults, males and females, struggling with very acute, high-level mental health and substance addiction issues. I was there for almost 15 years, facilitating individual, group therapy, family therapy. Also did outpatient work. I see currently across California clients on an outpatient level with various hospitals, community centers, and outpatient clinics. Also involved as a psychologist with the California Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, working what we call a crisis bed, and is for our incarcerated persons who are struggling with danger to self, to others, or gravely disabled. And our job is to hopefully stabilize them and to transition them back out to their normal housing there. And so a lot of varied experiences on that. I also enjoy psychoeducation, whether it be groups like this. I also host webinars through the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and really talk to in churches, community groups, and businesses. And as Kim was saying, is a lot of this information came from a lot of these groups that I have facilitated over the years, and where I saw a lot of families and themes saying, we don't know what to do, we're out of options, we're losing hope, what are some strategies? And that's kind of where the premise for where my book came from, which is a strategy to get loved ones who are resisting or who don't feel they have a problem with substance addiction or mental health, and what the families can do to get them help. And so So a lot of the information that I will talk to today comes from elements of my book. And so the first couple webinars that I had with through PALS, we did talked a little bit about the disease. We talked a little bit about some of what I call the must knows, identified 25 essential knowledges that I believe anyone navigating through this, whether you're an expert yourself or new to this, these are the 25 must know knowledges, such as how to set healthy limits and boundaries, how I conceptualize the disease, having hope. What are some strategies you can do to get your loved one to a place where they can accept help? And so for this one, for tonight, what we're going to focus a little bit more intently on is what I call the phases of the recovery process. Is a lot of families are in doubt. Okay, well, what do we do from here? Okay, they've been in some formal treatment for 60 days. Where do we go from here? Why is my loved one still thinking about drinking alcohol when they've been sober for 30 days? Why are they still having thoughts of wanting to die when they've been on antidepressant for 6 months? Why is my loved one still having dreams of using fentanyl when they've been sober for a year? And so a lot of those questions come up. And so what I divided up, there's having worked in treatment, there are different segments of the recovery or treatment process, which I will define, at least in my terms, how I conceptualize that when before we get started. So that is the goal for today. One thing that Kim said, and when I facilitate these groups, I believe, and whatever I teach children, family members, or anything, there's no such thing as a dumb, bad, or irrelevant question. I really like to erase that from people's thoughts, because if you think it's important, then it's important. And so even if you feel like you should know it, please, the worst question is the one not being asked. And so feel free to jot those questions down. Kim and Molly will be facilitating and sort of grouping those together in themes. And we'll carve out 15, maybe 20 minutes towards the end to ask any questions or answer any questions. So please think of those questions now, and as things come up, there could be diagnoses or anything under the umbrella of mental health. Hopefully, we can address those questions appropriately. Okay. So, thank you and welcome.
Yeah, well, again, we appreciate you being here. And as you mentioned, last time we got into a number of must-knows, and this week we're really kind of switching gears a little bit. And in PAL, it's maybe a phrase I heard somewhere else, but I've repeated it many times, and that is, sobriety isn't really the hard part. It's not necessarily hard to go through the detox. It's certainly not comfortable. It's not something pleasant. What ends up being difficult is recovery, staying sober. It's getting
Mhm.
sober is one thing, staying there is the next thing. And we try and define that recovery as what's really critical, and helping people to understand, why do they need to do this? Well, you mentioned it a minute ago. I will say that in my case, the minute my son finally made the decision to go to his first program, I was convinced that 30 days later he was going to be cured and come home and everything was going to be great.
Mhm.
And so, with that as a backdrop of, clearly understanding how recovery works, I'm really hoping, that's what you can share is this, you came up with this model, these phases, these things to help you understand what they're going through. And frankly, it takes time. So I appreciate it. And maybe, if that's a helpful backdrop, you can kind of jump in there and just kind of share with us your thoughts on all of
Mhm.
this.
That's a great point, Kim, is whenever we want to change something for any of us, of course, we have on the higher end trying to change an addiction issue or change a really significant pattern in our life. But sometimes just think of any of you that have even a small habit, whether it be biting your nails, whether it be something that you do that's just so idiosyncratic, meaning you just do it unconsciously without being aware of it. Um, all of that change process is hard, but if you're familiar with the change of process, number one, the hardest part is identifying it and making that decision where I need to change. And of course, the change in between where you have an action plan, but it's maintaining that change that's really critical. And that's what happens a lot with families that I see is that, okay, they've been in treatment for 30 days, 6 months, and we're done. Our job as a family is done. And one of the biggest premises for me is we tend to focus so much on the person who is the focus. right? Is that because they've been dealing with this issue for so long, so we tend to correlate the amount of work that needs to be done or change correlated to the amount of hurt someone's caused, and that's already there is something where I look at families and it's already a challenge. They're already behind the eight ball, is because you are the problem. You are the one with the legal case. You are the one who's been in and out of treatment. So you got to do all the work and we're going to stay in the backdrop. And I say, no, it's an all hands deck approach that the system has to make a change. There's a saying is no one had caused it, can't cure it, can't control it. But I say you've perpetuated, you facilitated in some form or fashion. So everyone recognizing the role is really critical. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So, um, well, if I'm gonna go ahead and share a screen, and like I said, I'm gonna have some refresher knowledge, and then the crux of today will be I have a graph or a table and a PowerPoint slide of the phase of recovery. So I'm thinking that, hey, we'll shoot for about 25, 30 minutes for some conversation, then we'll open up for some questions. So feel free to start shooting those questions. You don't have to wait till the end. Amali and Kim will be consolidating and putting those together. Okay. So in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So can someone just confirm, Kim, can you see what's on the screen?
Yes, the
Okay.
disease.
The disease and a not a very nice looking car. And so uh, there's no unifying definition of disease, and the mental health organization, the World Health Organization, the American Medical Association, all have their varying definitions of disease. Okay, we can agree that a medical disease is a medical condition that causes impairment in our life: heart, liver, kidney disease. Mental health, it could be any type of entity or condition diagnosis that causes impairment in our life, right? The depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolarity. And so I like to, and that's where sometimes it got us into challenges, is because, well, I don't really have a disease, or I don't consider it a disease. And so how I take it on a broader level is, to me, a disease is any entity, chronic entity, typically. Chronic meaning like long lasting, could be a person, place, situation, or thing that causes impairment in our life. And it's something that we're hard to distance ourselves from, or hard to manage or mitigate its symptoms. And so anything could be disease. And so just because it's not in defined in the American Medical Association or the American Psychiatric Association or anything else, doesn't mean it's not some type of entity that's causing impairment. And why I like to talk about things like jealousy, it's not a diagnosis, but if that causes impairment in your life, vengefulness, um, hedonism, which is this constant seeking for pleasure, all of those things can be your form of disease. Anger can be as well. And so my belief is, therefore, in those definitions, we all have our own version of a disease, something in our life that we've tried to manage that causes impairment. And so that's how it's an equal playing ground for all of us. So I like to look at the disease as some separate entity, is I believe we are never defined by any diagnosis or condition. People don't walk around saying, "Hi, I'm diabetes." "Hi, I'm congestive heart failure," right? No, but for some reason in mental health, we tend to do that. "Hi, I'm an addict," right? I'm schizophrenic. I'm bipolar. And what happens is when we say "I am" statements, we become our condition or our identity, our disease. And no, it is a footnote. It's something that we're challenged with, the symptoms. That's why I like to work with the symptoms. Okay, you have social anxiety disorder, but let's look at the symptoms. You get afraid of in front of groups of people. So that's why I want to work with, is the symptoms. And so I like to look at this separate entity that's outside of us, is because anything that we're able to understand that's separate in us, we can devise a plan towards it. And so there's a saying in the AA arenas or what have you, is our disease is always in the corner doing push-ups. And our job is to keep it there and manage it. And that's some of the stuff I do and find that are some attributes consistent with a strong recovery program. But for here, disease, I just want to say a few things, because I like to look at this car for any of you that are of age, and not to date myself, but if you remember the car Christine, back in Stephen King's movie, The Haunted Car, this is the first thing that I thought of. I don't think that's Christine, but it looked like it. And so I like to say that it's this disease can be this very rundown car, and it thrives on guilt, which is its oil, and fear, which is this gas. And this disease, this entity, that's what keeps it running. And that's where I find these very valid emotions that you all have. I'm not saying they're invalid emotions, but at high degrees, these are one of the most disempowering emotions. Guilt. I should have done something. I should have intervened when I knew my daughter was being abused. I should have not worked so hard. I should have never gotten that divorce. And I never should have remarried so quickly after my husband's passing, right? I should have recognized the symptoms earlier. I should have asked them what are they smoking or spending so much time in the room? Or I should have listened more when they were talking about wanting not to live anymore. Guilt is a very powerful emotion. It's one of the most powerful that can hang over your head. This disease can hang this over your head for the rest of your life if you allow it to. And it's one that disimpairs families and holds them paralyzed to getting help. Fear is just gas. Fear is legitimate. Guilt's legitimate, and so is fear. And fear, there's actually a survival mechanism with fear. That's what we do before we go hiking. We have fear of running out of water, so we pack some water, right? Fear of going scuba diving because malfunction, and we want to make sure we have enough oxygen. We tell people have a buddy system, navigate the weather. And so fear is legitimate, but when it's high degrees of fear, we become debilitated, we become paralyzed. And so guilt and fear are the ones that are legitimate emotions, but are the most powerful in keeping families paralyzed. And I talked about it in the prior webinar, but the fear that families have is my loved one can die. The three inevitable consequences to untreated mental health or addiction is people end up in jail, hospital, or they can lose their life. And we forget about that last one where they can lose their life is what keeps most families paralyzed. Well, yes, I know that my brother is in the house, using alcohol and Xanax, but as long as he's not homeless, I know my daughter is upstairs using marijuana and alcohol, but as long as she's not being victimized and trafficked. But that brother or daughter can die in the house. And the longer they stay in that state, it's hard to get them out of that state, the longer they become more naturalized into that lifestyle. And so we have to accept not emotionally, but we have to accept the reality that our loved one can lose help. And once we move that, we're able to take some necessary action. Okay, and real quickly before I go into phases, I come up with the 80-20 model, right? 80%, that's not a hard statistic. You can't Google it and there it is. This is just my experience having worked in this field for so long, like a rough estimate, just to give you an idea. But 80% of why someone struggles can be accounted for valid reasons. Let's say your loved one continues to struggle in and out of treatment, in and out of incarceration, or what have you, and maybe they had a congenital disorder. Maybe they were born with some type of condition, diabetes, or some mental health condition. Maybe they had abandonment issues. Maybe a mom used alcohol during their pregnancy. Maybe they have those underlying conditions. But 20%, so those are valid reasons why they struggle. 20% is what I call the barrier to getting to work on the 80%. And that's what I call the disease's manipulation aspect. It's the barrier, it's the moat, it's the armor that prevents someone from working on that 80%. And manipulation is getting people to do things they normally wouldn't do. And so there's thousands of ways to manipulate guilt, fear, threatening, isolation, stonewalling, which where we create this wall, we don't talk to you, um, all those things, the guilt tripping part. And we have to shut that down. That's disease's way of preventing them from working on that 80%. And as families, that's what we need to shut down. So whenever someone comes to treatment, they're in treatment, so they're moving in the right direction, and they immediately want to focus on, oh, okay, our loved one, how do we get them stable? What medications do they need? And how do we not let them use substances anymore? That's a very important, and that's part of the treatment. But 80%, I talk to the families, what do we need to do? For that 20%, what are we going to do as a family to shut that down? right? Because the disease can thrive in there for a long time or maybe for a lifetime. Okay. So I'm going to go into the phase of recovery model. Okay, these are just some of my nest nodes that I highlighted, I believe, in one of the earlier ones. And
Mhm.
so the phase of recovery. And so as Kim was talking about recovery, how I talk about treatment as well, how to get your resisting loved one to treatment. I was having trouble with that word because sometimes the what people first think of when you think of treatment is, oh my God, we're going to send them to an institution. It's too far away. We can't afford it. Our insurance is not going to cover it, which is legitimate and valid. Those are real barriers sometimes for some people getting the treatment that they need. But I also say is how to get your resisting loved one to a point where they accept help. And so treatment can also be used for, at least in the context of my book, of how to get them help. And so treatment, yes, is the formal aspect of getting help, right? That could be getting to a detox facility. That could mean doing intensive outpatient where you're in groups, that's residential treatment where you're out of your environment and you'll have groups and therapy and see a psychiatrist. That could be individual therapy. Part of treatment can go to 12-step meeting if that pertains, smart recovery, or anything of that nature. Sometimes some churches have their own modalities. So treatment doesn't have to be going into an institution, so to speak. However, there are some cases where they need that type of institution. They need structure, routine in a facility where they're monitored, they need to be stabilized away from their environment that perpetuates the struggle. And so recovery, like I said, we all have a version of disease. So I believe every single one of us are in some form of recovery. And recovery just simply means a path to healthier living. That's it, right? And we focus on our physical health, our mental or emotional, our social health, our spiritual health. And so we're all in some form of recovery because I believe that recovery is the most important aspect of our life. Recovery meaning our path to a healthier living. Because out with recovery, if we're not being honest, if we're not being healthy, if we're not taking care of our mind, body, and spirit, we greatly minimize our chance to be that great father, that husband, that wife, that worker, that sibling, that friend. All of those things are greatly minimized if we're not in our healthiest self or our healthier self. So recovery and treatment, they're identified. And so what I was speaking about earlier, the phase of recovery, because like I was talking about earlier, we get a lot of family members who were frustrated. Why is our son or daughter they've been in treatment for 2 weeks and they want to leave right away, or they're blaming us for everything, or clients themselves, gosh, I've been on this antidepressant or I've been doing trauma therapy for 3 months and I still am angry and resentful, or I still have low self-worth, or I still think about that night. And so all of these legitimate and valid questions. And so I started to think about how can we break this recovery process down, not only for the client themselves, but for the families, to help them understand that this is a process and it usually on some level is a lifelong process. But as long as someone's on this path in this healthy trajectory, it does get easier and more automatic over time. So let's talk a little about that. So phase of recovery and treatment. So pre-treatment, that may be some of you here today. Pre-treatment or pre-help, so to speak, is that phase that you can all recall or you may be into. That's when we don't know what to do. We're fearful. We feel guilty. Our loved one doesn't think he or she has an issue with their alcohol, their marijuana, their fentanyl, whatever it may be. They don't believe they're depressed. They're not really understanding their suicidality or they're anything like that. And so we're afraid as family members because we care about them. So pre-treatment, there's panic, there's fear, there's confusion, there's anxiety and hopelessness. And we'll talk a little bit about the non-negotiables. Okay. And so from pre-treatment, that's where I come in or someone comes in to create some interventions and support to get them into what I call the first phase of the recovery process. Okay, the first phase typically to me is about the first 30 to 90 days. And that is where it's most critical. And I call it the ICU. So all of you who are familiar, maybe not familiar, it stands for the intensive care unit. So if any of you have been there because you had a stroke or heart attack or a loved one had a drug overdose or a suicide attempt or they got in a bad car accident, the ICU is a period of stabilization. You're not in the ICU thinking about having babies, starting a family, getting engaged, getting a promotion at work, buying a new house. No, you are there strictly to stabilize and survive. And so the first 30 to 90 days is, I believe, one of the most critical stages to get your loved one to a place of help. And sometimes that means a formal treatment place. And so sometimes people say, oh, well, I'm going to residential. Residential meaning that you are on campus, so to speak. You're on a housing situation where it's being monitored. You're receiving treatment, residential. That could be in a home-like place, or somewhere where you're out of your immediate environment, like a home, apartment, or what have you. And so sometimes say, well, I'm going to residential for 20 days or 2 weeks. To me, where I've seen the most success is minimum 30 days. 45 days is usually a good, but when I was working in treatment for 90 days, that's when you saw some significant growth. Does that mean that if they don't stay for 90 days, they're going to not be successful? No. But at that stage, they start to stabilize on medications. They distance themselves from their drug of choice. They start creating new friends. They start having clarity. They start maybe hoping helpfulness. Maybe the family's starting to repair. And so, intensive care unit, obviously, if they're in treatment for mental health or addiction, it's not the same as a hospital ICU. But the reason why I say it is their job is survival. If they just had a suicide attempt, they're having a psychotic episode, they are struggling with intense alcohol abuse, they are like in the ICU, that if they don't get help sooner or later, they're not going to make it or something bad's going to happen. Okay. Phase two is usually about 3 months to 1 year, right? And we look at, typically speaking, at least I do, is 1 year being the early recovery process. Does that mean you're in residential for 1 year? No, that means that for that 1 year, that's how long it can take for someone to sort of break out of old patterns, find an accurate diagnosis, stabilize on medication, create new fellowship of people, the family dynamics starting to change, clarity of thoughts. If someone was admitted to a hospital because they had a manic episode or a psychotic episode, psychotic meaning detachment from reality, it's going to take a while. Maybe some of you have been there for that person to stabilize. And it's not 2 weeks and then they go back home and back to the normal way of living. And so phase three is 1 to 2 years, and phase four is 2 years plus. What happens, there's a nice correlation, and I'll talk about post-acute withdrawal syndrome in a little bit because I usually talk about it in the slide before. So post-acute withdrawal, if you break down the words, post meaning after, acute meaning the onset or the intensity withdrawal syndrome, whenever you take away something from someone who's been using it to cope, and I call it the life preserver, right? Let's say it's alcohol. I know I'm using alcohol because that is one of the most pervasive, but there's a lot. There's spice. So those of you who don't know spice, it's a synthetic that is not good, right? And spice, and it's easily accessible. It's cheap, and it can cause a lot of psychosis. But as you know, there's a lot of substances out there, even excessive caffeine out there that they could sell at gas stations. Sucking on copious amounts of caffeine is not good. But a lot of your loved ones or people struggling, that is what I call their life preserver. And when you take away that life preserver, it's very scary for them because on some level, even how sick it may be or unwell, that is what they believe is keeping them afloat. And our job is to help them find another life preserver. And so post-acute withdrawal, imagine that one thing in your life, whether it be the gym, meditation, Bible study, whatever it may be. Imagine if I was to take that away from you, right? How would you react, right? And it would be, you'd probably panic. And that's kind of what your loved ones are dealing with. You are taking the one thing they believe and then their unhealthy state that's keeping them afloat. So a post-acute withdrawal are all the change that take place on a physical level. If you take alcohol from someone who's drinking chronically, they are going to have um, um, shakes or seizures. They're going to have anger outbursts, depression, or those kind of symptoms. that's physical and mental. Social, they may withdraw because drinking alcohol made them feel relaxed around people and funny and accepted. And so when you're taking that away, so post-acute withdrawal typically is most intense in phase one. That's why you see most people relapse on substances or leave treatment within the first 30 to 90 days, is because they can white knuckle it for 30 days. And if they're not trying to find other healthy coping mechanisms, they're going to tear at the seams. And it always tells me, if someone goes to treatment and they're not doing anything, they're not going to groups, they're not taking the medication, they're just white knuckling it, about 30 days is when they start falling apart, where they have a choice to make. They can either leave treatment or start being open to the treatment process. So post-acute withdrawal is most intense during the phase one, phase two, but as long as the person's getting treated and stabilized, those intensity of those symptoms can decrease as time goes on. Okay. People up to phase three can have still nightmares or using dreams like, oh my God, I think I drank alcohol last night, or why am I still drinking, thinking about smoking marijuana? And so, but it typically decreases over time as the person gets better. So the highest rate of struggle, relapse versus lapse. And so a relapse is whenever we engage in a behavior that we've tried to lessen, right? If your issue is overeating and you've tried to minimize that and you go ahead and binge and overeat, you've sort of had a relapse, right? And if we keep doing it over and over again without getting help, those are what we call relapse. So relapse to me, and it's not my own terms, is usually this big dip, this major dip and fall because a person's not engaging in actions and behaviors to prevent that. So relapse is like that. Let's say, for example, someone tries to stop alcohol drinking on their own. You know what? I'm just going to stop drinking, but I'm not going to go to any meetings. I'm not going to talk to a therapist. I'm not going to talk to anybody else. I'm just going to white knuckle it. And without doing that, they dip. They drink alcohol. And down here in this dip, it's hard to come back up. Maybe they do come back up, or maybe they stay down there and have a alcohol bender for weeks, months, maybe years. Maybe they don't make it. Maybe they get hospitalized. Maybe they die. But to come back up is a struggle because they don't have things like fellowship, accountability, and stuff like that. Okay, so a relapse is this big dip. A lapse is just a slip, right? You can slip. Let's say, for example, someone attended treatment for 90 days and they're feeling good, they're sober, and maybe their great aunt passes away, who that person was very close to. And you know what? I had a bottle of wine. I had a bottle of wine and I slipped, I messed up. But you know what? Since I have a recovery program in place, I talked to my therapist, I talked to my sponsor, I got back to my groups, and I got back up. So there's a difference between a relapse in a lapse. A lapse is more just a quick dip, and it's usually correlated to the strength of someone's recovery program. The recovery program is like their barrier, their protection. But the highest rate of struggle is phase one and phase two, and that's what you need to do to keep them in some form of treatment during that period of time. Because I get a lot of families members saying, "Oh my God, we spent so much money. This is our third time in treatment. It's hopeless. There's nothing else we can do." And I said, "Well, let me ask you this: the first three treatments they went to, right? What did you do different?" Well, the first treatment, they left after 3 days and they ended up using a lot of meth, and they made an attempt at their on their life. This time, wow, you know what? No, they went 2 months sober, and then when they had a relapse, they came back quicker because they had a therapy group to go to. And so you got to look at the difference, not this sole outcome of they relapsed or they cut on themselves. It's like, okay, well, compared to prior to treatment, how is it different? And a lot of times families said, you know what, you're right. There is a difference. Okay. So pink cloud, if anybody heard of pink cloud, sometimes that's that phone call you get. They're in treatment. Oh, mom and dad, or honey, I'm good now. I say no to drugs. I found God, alcohol no more. I'm good. I'm ready to go. I want to come home now. This is like the second day, right? There could be various reasons why they think that. Number one, maybe they're sleeping, they're eating, they're not using drugs. Maybe they got a medication that's obviously working very well. Maybe they're starting to talk about things. And of course, I don't tell family members to say, "Oh no, come on, Jacob, that's just a pink cloud. Come on, that's not real." No, I said, validate them. Say, you know what? Good job, Jacob. I can hear it in your voice. Let's stick with it. We've been here before, and let's really break that pattern. Just keep sticking with it. I love the progress. Let's keep with it. Okay. So pink cloud, because when you hear that, behind are some dark clouds. It's that stuff that's been a barrier. It's that abuse I didn't process anymore. It's that trauma, that divorce, that bankruptcy I endured. And so just recognize that. So one thing that's really important as we're wrapping up, at least for this part, before we start maybe opening up questions, is what's critically important in anybody, I believe, recovery program in life are what we call structure, routine, and accountability. Structure meaning that's why the pandemic was so impactful for people. I literally saw people come to therapy, successful business owners, because the gym closed. Because what do? We go to the gym, we work out, we sweat, we feel good, we go home, we take a shower, we get ready for work. But when we took that away from us, that really disrupted people's lives. We didn't realize how important a thing like that was. And not just the gym, that could have been your church services, that could have been the weekly dinners that you had or lunch, that could be going to the office. So structure is this organization to the day is critically important, especially in the recovery process. Routine is more personalized, like, hey, well, I meditate in the morning at 8, and I go to church at noon, and then I eat lunch at 1, and then I go to the gym at 5, and then I see my kids at 6. Routine is what's more specific, and accountability are these entities that are going to hold you responsible. Whenever someone leaves treatment, I tell them you need about 5 entities that are going to hold you accountable. And by the way, on a very general sense, mom, dad, wife, grandma, grandpa, those aren't 5 because they all constitute one entity. I'm not saying they're not healthy, but they're not really objective. Well, I don't want to tell grandma because she's going to tell grandpa. I don't want to tell mom because that's going to really stress her out. You want someone like a therapist objective, sometimes a pastor at a church, sometimes a sponsor at a meeting, sometimes maybe that's a healthy, sober peer or mentor. Okay. And so accountability are these things going to hold you accountable. A job can hold you accountable, right? Your kids, a dog can hold you accountable if hey, I have to stay healthy because I can't walk my dog high as a kite. So, and then non-negotiables, and I'll talk about that and we'll open up the questions as we are nearing that time, is non-negotiables as a family unit are the things that you have to accept as a family no matter what. If you're going to support them, these are the things that you need to hold together as a family unit, the non-negotiables. Non-negotiables. Hey, we love and care about you. We're always going to be here for you. We just can't continue to support this lifestyle. So number one, they have to be completely abstinent from all mind-altering substance, right? And that's anything unless it's prescribed. But I don't care if it's natural, it came from the ground, or marijuana. There's that argument, it comes from the ground, and for some people that works. But if it's obviously something that is impacting their life in a negative way, you have to tell them no, even if it's caffeine or energy drinks. If they have to be complete abstinent from all mind-altering substances, right? Harm reduction. Harm reduction, real briefly, is when complete abstinent is not really on the table, but reducing harm. So, okay, well, I'm gonna drink beers, a 6-pack of beer rather than a bottle of tequila. Or you know what? I'm going to use marijuana, a little bit a day rather than using um, wax, which is a highly concentrated form of THC, right? Harm reduction. Harm reduction is passing out condoms to teenagers at high schools. Harm reduction. Clean needles, believe it or not, is a part of harm reduction so people don't spread diseases. They have to be in the care of a psychiatrist or psychiatric provider, and they got to take medications as prescribed. Those are because if someone is engaging in a mind-altering substance, harm reduction, let's say that's possible. A lot of the people I've worked with is because harm reduction hasn't worked. They tried to microdose their THC, they tried to microdose the mushrooms and so forth. And the people that I see that was no longer working. That was something we tried, it didn't work. But all 3 of these, the family unit has to be very firm, is saying, hey, and you could do a random drug screen at home if that pertains, but they have to be absent from all mind-altering substances, be in the care of a psychiatrist, psychiatric provider, and they have to take all medications as prescribed. Okay? And look at that, 612. I know that was a lot of information that I just threw at you. And it looks like, based on Kim, that he's been putting together some questions. Let's ask some questions. If you need any of these slides, feel free to take a picture of these slides if you want to. Um, I'll put this one up since this one is the most uh, um, common one. So, all right, Kim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Well, we did have a few, and I am saying to folks on the chat, if you do drop them in the Q&A, it's a little bit easier for us to actually directly answer them and or to keep track of them because we had a lot of things mixed in with the chat. But I'm going to work my way through them as we're kind of going through and waiting for some people to drop them over there. And, you know, a number of them came in and they kind of describe a little bit of their situation. And this is
Mhm.
one. And it says, you know, my 47-year-old son coming home from a 30-day alcohol detox next week to a halfway house, his fifth rehab, also now diagnosed with bipolar. I'm not sure how to help him get the right kind of counselor when he comes back or convince him to go. He would never even go to AA before. He is not allowed back in my home now. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your persistence and work with your loved one. And one thing that's very, very humbling for any of us in anything, not just for treatment recovery, is being humble enough to recognize that what we've been doing hasn't been working. Right? If 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 you continue to date people and they break up with you or cheat on you or what have you, we have to be humble enough to look what's the common ingredient. Myself, right? We have to be humble enough, and so not to say that you're doing anything blatantly wrong. One of the things, the must knows that I share is the reason why people can continue to struggle long term is because they can, right? On some level, there is something that's allowing to perpetuate that. So if this has been his fifth time in treatment, and for example, let's just say he's in treatment for 30 or 90 days or what have you, and he just goes back to his way of living, right? Then you highly increase that chances of recidivism or engaging in those old behaviors is because it can take, like I said earlier, phase one, phase two, a period of time where things start to become routine with them. And so just like the ICU, the perfect example I like to give, if someone had a stroke and like I said, for any of you who have or have been or had or have a loved one that had a stroke, right? How do you maximize their chances of being success on the long term? And it's the same thing. Do they go home? So they had a, let's say, a moderate level of stroke, and they were working full time, and they're in the ICU for 8 days. Do they go back home to that work of 40, 50 hours a week or travel or what have you upon discharge from the ICU? No. What do they usually do? They have some level of step down rehabilitative care, whether it be cognitive care, speech care, ambulatory. They start moving and walking again to maximize their success. And that's what happens a lot. It makes sense for us in the medical arena, but when it comes to mental health, no, we just believe that they're cured. And so we have to recognize, so I don't know with your son, but you have to look at what is the consistent theme of why he keeps going back to treatment for um, 4 or 5 times. Does he stop taking his medication? Does he start hanging around old people, places, situations, and things? Does he start engaging in substances? Do we stop as a family as working together? Do we start do we stop holding those assertive family boundaries? I always say is that you could tell your loved ones, we're always going to love and care about you. It's just that we can't support this lifestyle any longer. And these are the things that we want you to do if I'm going to participate in your life. Because this disease doesn't care. This disease, as Dr. Callahan, who was a psychiatrist in the military, said that it's like a terrorist in the home. It will hold you hostage, emotionally hostage, if anything, for the rest of your life if you allow it to. And so, and one last thing with bipolar, I think you said bipolar, is you got to remember, to me, mania is a drug. For those of you who aren't familiar, mania is a condition or symptom of bipolar disorder, but you can also get mania from substances. But it's this grandiose ideas, goal-directed activity, less need for sleep, and so forth. And imagine, just being able to think clearly and remember and feel like you're on top of the world. Who wouldn't want to not be manic, right? I don't think any one of us would not want to be manic. And so you get people who want to induce their mania, drink a lot of energy drinks, don't sleep for a while, um, or use certain substances, but they don't want to get rid of their mania or not take their medication. So we have to recognize that, mania. And one last thing, and when I answer questions, I try to broaden it to all of you, not just specifically for bipolar, but if you remember the movie Lord of the Rings, right? So basically it was a ring that it came with a lot of things, a lot of power. And I look at mania as that ring, is that there's a lot of great stuff that comes with it, but there's also a lot of destruction that you leave behind. And so mania is one of those things that it's that person's responsibility to be able to manage those symptoms, do whatever they need to do, take medication, stress management techniques, or whatever it may be to hopefully mitigate or moderate or lessen their propensity to get manic. Okay. All right.
So I think this one might be a kind of a quick one, but it has. I've heard people say this before, and you go to an AA meeting, and everyone there is asked to introduce themselves as an alcoholic or an addict. And when you were describing it earlier, you were kind of talking about it's not their identity. So the question is really reconciling how they describe themselves versus how we label or talk about individuals that are
Yeah.
substances.
Yeah, I'm not here to change how they do it there. Obviously, there's many aspects that really work. A lot of the treatment that I've worked in, people that was their um, life preserver, going to meetings, being a sponsor, having commitments at meetings. But just on a clinical sense, whenever we tell ourselves, I am something, we become that, right? And so I would rather say, if in an ideal world is, hey, you know what? My name is Jeff and I struggle with alcohol, right? Or I have challenges with smoking meth, right? Or I struggle with depression. So it's less permanence, right? But when we tell ourselves we're always something, especially a negative connotation, it changes our narrative. It really does. It's a footnote of our life, but it's not our front page story. So every time we talk to someone, hey, this is who I am. And people, if we allow them, or if they think that, hey, well, I was abused as a child, and that's our synopsis, that's our front page story, we are going to start treating ourselves like that, and people will start treating us like that. If we're, hey, I'm a schizophrenic, people will start treating you according to your symptoms, right, and not see that other aspects of you. So that's what I would like to do, is for people to say, hey, I struggle with, because there's temporariness. I don't know if that's a word, rather than permanence, with
Sure.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Good
Well,
question.
thank you. Yeah. So this question is, my 39-year-old son is coming home from tomorrow from 30-day rehab. He's been there 5 to 6 times over the last, or 5 to 6 times in rehab over the last 7, 8 years. And the question is, I want to tell him if he relapses again, I will evict him from the house I own. He has not paid rent in over a year. And then this is the part that they're asking, and I want to couch it in this, is that the question is, should that be a conversation immediately? And I want to just add a caveat that we constantly get questions around something I say is going to suddenly cause an issue. So maybe as you address it, you can answer it from that perspective as well, because I'm about to do something and now something's going to happen.
Yeah. And it's, remember, we have the individual disease, but we also have the family disease. So that's the family disease. We're going to walk on eggshells. I like to look at it as like the bull in the china shop. Like everyone's just, "Oh, okay, please don't make a movement." Where we're walking on ice, like very slowly. And that's exactly where the disease wants you. It wants you to be fearful, walking on eggshells. And by the way, research shows consistently that when you talk about suicide or ask someone about suicide, it's not going to make them go do suicide. Actually, a lot of times it helps mitigate someone wanting to commit suicide. Hey, wow, you talk about not wanting to live anymore. Hey, what can I do to help you? But we're like, well, don't plant seeds in their head. Don't plant seeds in their heads. And no, that's quite the opposite. Research consistently shows. And someone struggling, that's no shortage of someone who's also struggling with substances. Like, hey, man, you really look different. You really seem different. And I'm worried about you. I'm concerned about you. Hey, let me know what I can do to help you. And so absolutely. The best time to mention these things or while they're in treatment, because if they want to go off in something like that, that's where they can process with people. They're in a safe environment. Too many times they go to treatment, they're stable, and oh, by the way, you can't stay at our condo anymore, and they're home already, and or hey, you relapse one more time and we're kind of done with you. That's not the time to do that, right? You want to do it as an ongoing part of the treatment process and set that boundary limit there. And so, yeah, I would have that conversation if you can sooner than later, and tell them the reasons for it, like, and don't minimize their good work, right? Hey, I've had people in treatment for 15 years and get it right the 16th time, right? But I know that's hard emotionally, financially, and so forth. But we got to look at why, what are we been doing? What are he or she been doing that we keep finding ourselves in this situation? It hasn't failed in almost 20 years that I've been doing this work, that you look at their map and plan whenever family says, we done everything. No. Whenever we say we've done everything, we haven't touched the surface. But we've done everything. I could pinpoint some caveat, some kink in that system, whether it be a person allowing them to stay at our house, whether it be the little money that we give or whatever else it may be. And so, no, absolutely. And that's a leverage. And for me, it's not that we tough love, meaning that we're done with you. It's we want to set ourselves loved one up for a place of desperation where they have to get a point where they have to accept help. And that's one of the strategies we do, and sometimes housing, right? If someone can be evicted in their fifth home and we give them a sixth home because of their drug use, where's the motivation to get sober? Where's the motivation to abide by apartment rules? Where's the motivation to get healthy? We keep recycling the vicious cycle of situation. And a lot of times in the family system, you can identify one or more factors of why this cycle keeps going over and over again.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate that because many of those things are really in line with what we talk about in the meetings, and it's very universal to a lot of folks, including the next um, question, which several people have asked, and and a lot of times we're talking to parents and we're providing resources like tonight. We're doing this video, we're talking to you, we're hearing from you. You have a book, we can read your book. And a couple of people are asking a question around the issue of, okay, should we share these kinds of resources with our loved ones? In other words, okay, I read your book. Should I try and get them to read your book? I've watched this video. Should I try and get them to watch this video?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all depends, right? No one case is ever the same and so forth. And usually what I have found when someone's really struggling, hey, by the way, read this, read this, read this, it usually doesn't go very well. But I'm not saying don't try it, it may be receptive. And just speak specifically to my book, it was originally designed for people who were acutely struggling. We don't know what to do. He or she's homeless. He or she's in treatment. He or she's in the behavioral unit of the hospital. He or she's living upstairs and refuse to come out and talk to us. He or she's talking to themselves, and we feel like they're not taking medication or need medication. And um, and so the book was originally designed for what strategies could we do as a family to get them help. But what I found is I start talking about other things, especially in the must knows, on what are the most consistent attributes or factors of a strong recovery program. So someone can look at these like fellowship, honesty, being humble, open to direction. And so someone who's trying to get healthy or sober, or they already are in recovery, can look at these factors. And so, yes, are there beneficial things from someone who can benefit from that? Yes. But I would encourage you more to use some of the strategies there to get them to the point to be more receptive. Because if you just hand a book to someone, let's say someone wants to lose weight, if anyone's been there before, or work on their skin, if someone, has bad skin and you just hand them, here you go, here's some Retin-A, or you want to lose weight, here's Richard Simmons, book. I don't think that's going to go very well. So, and that's no exception for someone who doesn't believe they have an issue. But I would talk to them more like, hey, I really want to help you. You're not the same. You're not acting the same. You just change a lot. I miss that person who I grew up with. There's a part I talk about validation. Validation means to acknowledge someone's truth. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it or believe it. You just acknowledge someone's truth. I know you're going through a tough time. I know your wife left you 3 years ago. I know it's tough, man, handling the family as a single parent. And I know drinking is the only thing that helps you. I see it kind of being a challenge for you because I don't see the same person that was laughing and working hard. Man, I want to support you. What can we do? Well, thank you for asking. I really want some help. Well, here's something that really helped me, or I heard help. Hey, if you find this helpful, there you go. Just like you wouldn't just hand a Bible to someone who doesn't believe in God, right? If you've ever tried that. Um, so there's a softer approach to sometimes things like that. So, um, yeah, don't put in their stocking stuffers or anything like that. That's probably not a good idea.
Yeah,
But thank you for that. That's a great question.
it is a good question, and it just goes to this the
Mm,
fact that we just are I put myself in this boat. You're so desperate, you just want to do something.
yeah.
And sometimes you realize that the person that you really are in control of is you. And so there are things you can do, and that's key. So maybe we're down to maybe two quick last questions, and we can wrap this up. And we're going to try and save the chat, and if there's anything on here that we can answer and send out to the group, we will. And we did
Mhm.
also tape this, so we'll have an opportunity for some to be able to watch it after the fact. But last couple questions, and this one sort of plays into the an issue where I remember somebody that worked in the treatment field telling me that the weakest link in the entire system is after they leave a treatment program. It's at that
Mhm.
point where they leave that. And this question, I think, plays into that, which is why can some people be sober, maybe be in a sober home for 10 months or so at a time, and then the day they decide to leave, they relapse?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, usually for that, it's a setup, right? And there's a lot of good things. So you got to look at what's been happening there. There's probably structure, routine, there's accountability. Maybe they had reservations. Maybe they just weren't ready to get healthy. Maybe they weren't really buying into wanting to get healthy at that time because yes, can those help lessen those chances of recidivism or relapse? Yes, but chances are, I can always guarantee you, that person who relapsed out there, that disease was already building a case. Oh man, it was already building a case. There's a such thing as what we call a prelapse. A prelapse is all the perfect storm from forming, right? And it's never people think they relapse and everything just lined up so quickly. Sometimes that's the case, but a lot of times, right, there's prelapse, there's all these factors, and that's what you have to look at. Well, starts isolating, or she starts isolating. She stops going to therapy, so to speak, stops attending meetings if they attend meetings. They stop, they're taking on too much stress, they're overworking, or they start, saying, I got this, and they start drinking alcohol again, or smoking a little weed or mind altering substances. And so a lot of times you can pinpoint, it doesn't usually just happen. In extreme cases, yes, you're doing well, and a good friend of yours passes away or some that those can, but most of the time those situations. So no house, so to speak, should be the hinging factor of why someone uses or not. So I can almost guarantee you that person was already building that case and already had strong reservations long before that. They're obviously not being honest about their reservations of using. Tell your therapist, tell on yourself, you know what? Doc or whoever, I've been thinking about marijuana for the past 3 weeks. I have a friend who smokes a lot of marijuana. When I leave this group home, he's having a raging party at his house. I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to go, but if I go, I'm going to use. That's what you need to do is you need to tell on yourself, right? And so I can nearly guarantee you, just know that a person's job is to find out what are the factors leading up to that perfect storm because the disease will have checkmate for you 5, 6, 8 moves ahead of time. So that person that's struggling has to recognize, oh my God, I'm starting to isolate myself. Oh my God, I'm starting to have resentments. Oh my God, I'm starting to blame people. Those are the factors they have to recognize to start changing those before they get that perfect storm.
Yeah, yeah. And final question, and then let you kind of wrap up with any final parting thoughts. And I believe you answered this during the conversation earlier, but maybe it's a good time to reiterate because it to me it's got some positive aspects to it. And the question is really, after many months of being sober, is it a good sign if they start being sober again within, say, 24 hours rather than having a long relapse?
if I'm hearing that question right, is so someone's sober and then they use again.
Relapse, but then they get right back on track quickly.
Yes, and so I was also alluding to earlier between a relapse and a lapse that has a direct relationship with the strength of someone's recovery. And I talk about what I find are the most stable attributes of a strong recovery. Like I said, we're all in recovery, and some of those are being honest with yourself and others, being humble, meaning that I don't have pride and ego. I'm open to direction and feedback. I have good fellowship around me. I have structure, routine, and accountability. I have purpose in my life. And yes, that's what happens between a relapse and a lapse. If you don't have those things I mentioned to you, so to speak, yeah, what you're just doing, you're just hanging on to a dear rope, and then all of a sudden you dip, and it's going to be very hard to come back because you don't have things like structure, routine, accountability, fellowship, healthy coping mechanisms. So absolutely. And if someone does lapse, hey, say, man, I'm glad you're back. Because one thing we don't want to do, because we had it a lot in residential treatment where people will be there for 90 days and all of a sudden you see them a month later. And the last thing we praise them for coming back, to getting humble enough to come back because that's how much they want to get better. Because you could easily say, you know what, I'm too embarrassed, I'm too ashamed to go back there, especially in a month's time. And so rather than focus, okay, what can we do differently? Oh, okay. So after you left treatment, you started to go to school. You took 30 hours, you took 30 units in college, and you worked, part time. Well, yeah, that's not good. And so usually there are factors that you can identify. And if someone perpetually struggles, I can almost guarantee you, if you take an honest look, that person and the family unit can identify those factors. Well, yeah, we start doing this and that. We stop, and so that's what you want to do is look at the whole system level. And everyone has to have an equal. Let's say this last thing is I like to use the analogy of a canoe boat. If you ever rowed a boat, the way you maximize distance and speed is that if everyone's working 100% on their share, it's not the one person is doing all the rowing. That's what we find with a lot of families is, okay, you're the sick one, you're the one that has all the problems, you do all the rowing. Or maybe a parent does the rowing at first, or two parents. Sooner or later, they're going to get burned out. And so, if everyone wants to make that change, everyone has to pick up an oar. And for a family of five, they have to accept 20% responsibility and work 100% on that share. Not that everyone has the same strength, abilities, but everyone has to work on their 100% share of responsibility. That's how you can make major, long-lasting changes.
Wow. I wish we could spend a lot more time, but you know what we're going to do is we're going to invite you back, and hopefully you'll say yes. And we're
Or
going to copy the chat, and we'll see if there's anything on there that we can respond back and let people know, and also make this available to those that weren't able to make it with us tonight. But I want to thank you for that, and tonight, and just any last comments before I close things up?
yeah, last one, and I mentioned this. My must-know number one is have hope, right? I've worked with some really dire cases where people almost died, attempted suicide 24 or 48 hours before coming to treatment. Families felt very, very lost and helpless. Have hope. You know, people can get better and so forth. And I work in the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and people have done some heinous stuff, but people can get better. Are there some people that don't want to, and it's very difficult? Yes, but people can get better. We just got to create this situation where we can help facilitate that. So definitely have hope for your loved ones. Okay.
Thank you again. And remember, Dr. Licuanan, he's written a book on all of this, how to get your resisting loved one into treatment. And we put the link to that to be able to get that in the chat. We'll also send it out in a follow-up after this so that you have that. So you can certainly pick that up and read the entire book and the rest of the information. And like I said, we'll be inviting him back again. And we do appreciate everybody joining us tonight. And I just hope that this was helpful. I hope it was useful to you. And again, I'm sorry we can't answer all the questions right now, but we're gonna do our best to get back to you and let you know if there's anything else that we can help and we can answer with. So, God bless and thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you again, Dr. Kwana.
Thank you. Bye bye.